By the time Austin Butler appeared on the 2023 awards circuit, something was immediately, unsettlingly clear. The voice was wrong. Not wrong like a bad accent, not wrong like a forgotten dialect coach. Wrong in a deeper, more structural sense. The Elvis Presley cadence, that warm southern honey cut with raw Memphis gravel, had not left his body when filming ended. It had taken up residence there. Interviewers noticed it. His family noticed it. His family, in fact, said, and this is his own account, that he didn't sound like himself anymore. Baz Luhrmann, the director who had cast him, admitted that he genuinely didn't understand how Austin Butler actually sounded in real life, even after months of working together. His assistant had to clarify, he's not Southern, he's from Anaheim, California. You can lose touch with who you actually are, and I definitely had that when I finished Elvis, not knowing who I was. This video is about that confusion, that dissolving boundary. Because what happened to Austin Butler on the set of Elvis was not just extreme preparation. It was something rarer, more dangerous, and philosophically more interesting. It was a case of an actor who doesn't just perform a role, but is inhabited by one. An actor who functions less like a craftsman and more like a medium. We call it the ghost in the machine. The machine is Butler himself, the body, the voice, the technique, the ambition. And the ghost? That's whoever he decides to let in. Elvis, Feyd-Rautha, Benny Cross. The ghost moves through the machine, animates it, and then, when the cameras stop, it doesn't always leave clean. To understand why this happens, you have to go back to where the machine was built. Back to a quiet house in Anaheim, California, and a child who had no idea who he was until he discovered he could be someone else. There is a particular kind of loneliness that creative people carry from childhood. Not the dramatic loneliness of tragedy, but the quiet loneliness of someone who experiences the world at a frequency slightly different from everyone around them. Austin Butler grew up inside that frequency. By every account, his own, his teachers', his boyhood friends', Butler was a child defined by radical shyness. Not introversion in the fashionable literary sense, shyness as social paralysis. He preferred playing guitar alone in his bedroom to playing with other children. He didn't mix. He carried his own milk jug to a friend's house because the family didn't have the right kind. His former kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Betts, confirmed it without hesitation. He was very nervous, very withdrawn. He needed his own supplies. His parents divorced when he was 7. His mother, Lori Ann, a woman he would later call his best friend, opened a daycare in the family home. The family moved to Van Nuys. The television at his father's house was always tuned to Turner Classic Movies, James Dean, Brando, the icons of volatile interiority playing nightly on a CRT in a California suburb. Butler absorbed them. He didn't know it yet, but he was already being educated. It's why I love to play pretend in class. I could be someone else. That sentence contains everything. For a child with no reliable sense of selfhood in social situations, acting wasn't just a career option. It was a survival technology, a method for inhabiting the world without having to be fully, vulnerably himself in it. The machine was being constructed from the start, not as an artistic tool, but as a coping mechanism. The path into the industry was accidental and perfectly American. At roughly age 11 or 12, his stepbrother was scouted by a talent agent at the Orange County Fair. Butler tagged along. Someone saw him and asked his mother, "You got another kid? Does he want to audition too?" And this chronically shy boy, for reasons he himself still can't fully explain, said yes. What followed was a decade of Disney Channel and Nickelodeon projects: Hannah Montana, Zoe 101, iCarly, The Carrie Diaries. One-dimensional boyfriend roles where, as Butler puts it, he was mostly introduced walking through doorways while girls turned their heads and swooned. He wasn't without self-awareness about it. He was embarrassed by some of the material, and he was honest that ambition and the ability to execute that ambition weren't yet aligned. He later referenced a concept articulated by radio host Ira Glass: the gap between where your taste is and where your skill is. Butler was living in that gap for the better part of a decade, taking jobs to survive, learning in public, forming the machine's components, piece by piece. The shift began when he moved to New York at roughly age 20. Los Angeles, he realized, had no serious theater culture in the way he was beginning to crave it. In New York, he started attending plays obsessively, sometimes 2 in a single day. He watched Mark Rylance perform Richard III and Twelfth Night, and something in those performances, that fusion of technical precision with something almost preternaturally alive, shattered his existing idea of what acting could be. He understood then why his heroes, De Niro, Brando, had all cut their teeth on stage. Because you're only as good as you are that night. There is no safety net, no edit, no coverage. The live audience demands a truth that cannot be manufactured after the fact. He'd been grinding through TV projects for years when the call came that would functionally rewire his career. Denzel Washington was staging a Broadway revival of Eugene O'Neill's The Iceman Cometh in 2018, and Butler's agent suggested he audition. The character was Don Parrott, an 18-year-old consumed by guilt, complicity, and self-loathing, a deeply troubled young man living in the theater of his own self-deception. Butler spent days with his acting coach, Larry Moss, crafting his audition tape with the first camera he had bought for himself, a camera he had purchased because he was considering walking away from acting entirely and becoming a filmmaker. He got the part. And then, something happened on that Broadway stage that permanently altered his trajectory. Denzel Washington took notice. From day one, that there's no one right way to do anything artistic. The imperfections are where the juice is. That's where you capture lightning in a bottle. Washington didn't become a mentor through magnanimity alone. Butler earned it through preparation. He had memorized the entire massive script before the first table read. He would arrive at the theater earlier than Washington for every single performance. Eventually, Washington caught on to what was happening, waved him over into an empty theater, and began offering acting notes. Suddenly, Butler recalled, he had Denzel Washington almost as an acting coach. The New Yorker's Hilton Als reviewed the show and singled Butler out, alone among a cast of far more famous names, for extraordinary praise. Shortly afterward, Washington made an unsolicited phone call to filmmaker Baz Luhrmann, a man he had never met. He told Luhrmann that he had just worked with a young actor whose work ethic was unlike anything he had ever encountered. That call, which Butler never knew was coming, changed everything. The machine was ready. Now it needed a ghost. When Austin Butler learned that Baz Luhrmann was developing an Elvis Presley biopic, he didn't wait to be invited. He treated it, in his own words, as if he already had the job. He hired a movement coach, a dialect coach, an acting coach, and a singing coach, before he had even been seen by the director. He began studying Presley's life with the systematic intensity of someone pursuing a graduate thesis. He read everything. He watched every documentary. He listened to Elvis's entire catalog, in chronological order, while painting the walls of his new Los Angeles house. For his initial audition tape, Butler filmed himself performing Love Me Tender in his bedroom. He watched the playback and felt immediately what he described as a hollow inauthenticity. He was doing the external things, replicating the face, the mannerisms, the presentation. But it was, in his own diagnosis, just an impersonation. He couldn't send that. What happened next is the most revealing moment in Austin Butler's entire career. Not because of what he did, but because of why he did it. It maps the precise geography of where his method lives. Butler's mother, Lori Ann, had died in 2014 when he was 23 years old. She had closed her own business to devote herself to driving him to auditions, waiting outside for hours, driving home, and beginning again the next day. She was, by every measure, the foundation of his career and the center of his emotional life. In the days before he reattempted his audition tape, Butler had been watching documentaries and learned a biographical fact that stopped him cold. Elvis Presley's mother, Gladys, had also passed away when Elvis was 23 years old. That night, Butler had a nightmare. He dreamed his mother was alive again, and then died a second time. He woke flooded with grief, with that particular kind of raw, sourceless pain that comes from dreams that blur the boundary between loss you've processed and loss that is always, somehow, still fresh. And he thought, Elvis would put this in a song. I sat down at the piano in my bathrobe and just started fiddling. I wasn't trying to look and sound like Elvis. I wasn't trying to do anything but take that emotion and pour it into the song. He filmed it. He sent it to Lerman. 6 months later, Lerman called him, woke him up in fact, and said, "Hey Austin, are you ready to fly, Mr. Presley?" What Butler had discovered, in that bathrobe at a piano in the pre-dawn hours, was that the gateway into the character wasn't technical mimicry. It was somatic truth, the body's memory of actual grief accessed and redirected through the channel of another man's emotional history. The two losses rhymed, and in that rhyme, something deeper than performance became available. This is the architecture of possession, not method acting in the classical sense. Method acting asks you to draw on your own emotional memories to color a performance. What Butler was doing was something more total. He was finding the precise biographical overlap between himself and Elvis Presley, and using that overlap as a doorway to step fully into another identity. When COVID-19 shut down the production in March 2020, just days before filming was set to begin, the studio wanted to fly Butler home to Los Angeles. He refused. While cast members departed to be with their families, Butler stayed alone in an oceanside apartment on the Gold Coast of Australia and continued. He created what he described as a detective film evidence board, images of Elvis from every period of his life, connected with strings, covering the walls. He went 3 months without a hug. He did not return to his normal life. He did not allow Elvis to become the role. Elvis became the operating system. Production resumed in September 2020 and ran for 11 months, more than twice the originally planned 5-month schedule. Butler spent that entire period in a state of near continuous immersion, changing in an estimated 100 costumes, standing through endless fittings after full days of rehearsal. Elvis's production designer, Catherine Martin, later recalled having to remind herself to ask Butler if he had had a glass of water, because his willingness to accommodate every demand was so complete that it was easy to take advantage of it without intending to. Tom Hanks, who played Colonel Tom Parker in the film, and was no stranger to transformative performances, noticed the toll and intervened with a quiet, practical piece of advice. Commit to one thing a day that has nothing to do with the job. Read something unrelated. Take a walk with no destination. Let the actor breathe. Until Hanks said this, Butler had been consuming only Elvis, his music, his influences, his biography, his films, and nothing else. The permission to have a daily detour, as Hanks framed it, was a genuine relief. And then filming ended. The day after shooting wrapped in March 2021, Butler woke at 4 a.m. with excruciating pain and was rushed to the hospital. He had been diagnosed with a virus that simulated appendicitis. He spent a week bedridden. His body, which had been sustained on adrenaline and purpose and character for nearly a year, had begun to shut down the moment the demand was removed. The machine, having been run at maximum capacity for so long, was failing. My body just started shutting down the day after I finished Elvis. This is not metaphor. This is not artistic hyperbole dressed up as biography. This is the literal physiological consequence of what it means to dissolve the boundary between self and character so completely that the character's departure registers as a kind of bereavement. The voice that lingered, the identity confusion that followed, the physical collapse. These are the ghost's exit wounds. What Lerman captured on film was not a performance of Elvis Presley. It was a performance of possession itself, an actor so thoroughly inhabited by his subject that even months later, ordering an oat latte in a Los Angeles restaurant, the pronunciation was pure Presley. Here is the uncomfortable question that Dune, Part 2, and the Bike Riders force us to confront. What happens to a performer who has weaponized total self-erasure when the self-erasure nearly destroys him? Does he retreat to safer, more controlled technique? Or does he find a way to rewire the machine so it can hold the ghost without being consumed by it? The answer Austin Butler has arrived at is neither retreat nor repetition. It is architecture. When Denis Villeneuve cast Butler as Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, the aristocratic, gleefully sadistic heir to House Harkonnen, he was casting against everything Elvis had established about Butler's public persona. Where Elvis was warm, Feyd is glacial. Where Elvis expressed through sound, through shimmy, through the invitation of his body to the audience, Feyd operates through stillness, through the threat of motion withheld, through violence that feels not impulsive, but curated. Butler was explicit in interviews about the conscious decision he made this time. For Elvis, he had lived within that world for 3 years, day and night, the role consuming every waking hour. For Feyd, he knew that approach would be, in his own word, unhealthy. For his family, for his collaborators, and for Villeneuve himself, who was quick to agree. The director later noted that when the camera was rolling, it was as if Butler was possessed. But between takes, Butler was maintaining a conscious residual, perhaps 25 to 30% of Feyd still present, enough to stay in the world, not enough to lose himself in it. I made a conscious decision to have a boundary. It allowed for more freedom between action and cut. This is a significant evolution. The total possession of the Elvis period was not a sustainable method. The hospitalization alone is evidence enough. What Butler is describing with Feyd is the beginning of a more technically sophisticated approach, the ability to modulate depth of immersion, to choose how much of the self is displaced and how much remains as a load-bearing structure. And paradoxically, Butler argues that having that boundary actually allowed him to go deeper during the moments that mattered. Because he knew he wasn't going to lose control outside of the take, he could give himself permission to fully abandon control within it. The machine could run hotter in short, controlled bursts than it ever could in continuous operation. The technical execution of Feyd-Rautha is worth examining on its own terms, because Butler doesn't rely on the same somatic truth toolkit he used for Elvis. There's no biographical rhyme between Butler and a fictional Harkonnen prince. Instead, the preparation was more deliberately physical and conceptual. He studied animals for the role of Elvis too, but where Elvis's animalism was feline and warm, Feyd's is reptilian and cold. Butler described Feyd as having an alligator quality, the stillness of something approaching from below the surface, the unhurried certainty of a predator who knows it will reach its prey. The physicality serves the psychology. Feyd moves through the frame with an economy that communicates absolute confidence, not the showy confidence of someone who needs to assert dominance, but the settled confidence of someone who has never encountered a reason to doubt it. It is a performance constructed from negative space, from what is not done as much as what is. After the maximalist emotional expressiveness of Elvis, it represents a deliberate expansion of Butler's technical range. And then there is The Bike Riders, Jeff Nichols's visually elemental chronicle of a Midwestern motorcycle club's rise and fracture across the 1960s and early 70s. Butler plays Benny Cross, a man defined less by what he does than by what he refuses to become. Benny is beautiful in the way certain forces of nature are beautiful, absolutely indifferent to the effect he has on other people. He doesn't think. He doesn't plan. He exists with a totality that the film's older patriarch, played by Tom Hardy, finds both irresistible and ultimately heartbreaking. Benny is the kind of person other people project entire futures onto, and the kind of person who will never, can never, inhabit those projections. In his preparation, Butler learned something crucial from the source material. The real Benny, from Danny Lyon's original book of photographs, appears in those images only from behind or at angles that obscure his face. He is a mythic figure without a fixed identity, even in the documentary record. He is, in a literal sense, a blank onto whom others write their desires. Butler understood this and made it his technical challenge. How do you radiate a specific kind of emptiness? How do you make absence charismatic? The performance is deliberately opaque. Benny's lidded eyes, his unhurried physicality, the way he occupies physical space as if it belongs to him without any aggression. And it works precisely because Butler resists the actor's usual impulse to show us what the character is feeling. Benny may not know what he is feeling, and Butler trusts the audience to lean forward into that uncertainty. These two performances, taken together, tell us something important about Butler's evolution as a technician. Elvis required him to dismantle his own identity. Feyd required him to construct a controlled boundary. Benny required him to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can do is hold very still and let the audience project. Each role represents a different relationship between the actor's self and the character, and Butler, moving between them, is developing a vocabulary that goes well beyond any single method or school. We live in a particular cultural moment when it comes to acting. Social media has flattened the distance between performer and performance. We feel we know actors personally because we have access to their gym routines, their relationships, their political opinions, their daily habits, projected through carefully managed digital presences. The mystique that used to accumulate around figures like Brando or Dean, the sense that there was something unknowable at the center of the person, something that could only be accessed through the camera, has been largely engineered away. And then there is Austin Butler, who barely uses social media, who deflects personal questions with such practiced warmth that you don't notice you've received no actual answer until the conversation has moved on, and whose most defining professional act was to spend 3 years, becoming a dead man well enough to fool the director of the film and his own family. Is he a method actor in the classical sense? The label is inadequate. Method acting, in the Strasbourg tradition, is about accessing personal emotional truth. What Butler does is something adjacent but distinct. He is not mining his emotional history to color a performance from the outside. He is dissolving the boundary between self and character until the character generates its own emotional truth from the inside. The self becomes the vessel. The role provides the content. The danger of this approach is not theoretical. It is documented. The hospitalization, the lost voice, the disorientation that lasted months after Elvis rapped, the sense, in his own words, of not knowing who he was. These are not the costs of bad preparation or poor self-care. They are the structural consequences of an approach that treats identity as negotiable. And they raise a question that no amount of critical praise fully resolves. What is the long-term psychological cost of being the kind of actor Austin Butler is becoming? Butler himself seems aware of this, and the evolution from Elvis to Feyd to Benny suggests he is actively engaged in figuring out how to run the machine more sustainably. The deliberate 25 to 30% boundary he maintained on Dune, Part 2 isn't a sign of reduced commitment. It's a sign of a craftsman who has learned from experience that the machine needs maintenance to keep functioning at the highest level. Lerman, who worked with a young Leonardo DiCaprio, drew a comparison between DiCaprio's early career and Butler's trajectory. There is something apt about that comparison. DiCaprio also went through a period of physically and psychologically immersive performances before developing the technical architecture to channel that commitment more sustainably. The films he has made since then have not been less intense. They have been more controlled and, arguably, more precise. He told Denzel Washington's lesson back to himself in nearly every interview he gives about his career. Gratitude, humility, the understanding that longevity requires something that pure intensity cannot provide. And Washington, who turned Butler's career trajectory with a single unsolicited phone call, never asked for credit, never coordinated the gesture with Butler beforehand, never followed up afterward. He simply did it. Butler thanked him from the stage when he won the Golden Globe for Elvis, and the gratitude was visibly real, the kind of gratitude reserved for debts you know you can't repay. I gotta thank Denzel Washington. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your generosity in championing me when you did not have to. I am so grateful for all eternity to you. What does it mean to be a star in 2026 with this level of dedication? In a landscape populated by franchise performers who return to the same character across a decade of sequels, Butler represents something genuinely uncommon. An actor who treats every role as an act of identity replacement, not identity enhancement. He does not play characters who are versions of himself at various pitch levels. He builds new selves and inhabits them. And the residue of those selves, the Elvis voice, the physical collapse, the disorientation, is evidence of something being genuinely risked. There are perhaps 3 or 4 actors working today who operate at this level of visceral authenticity. Actors for whom the preparation is not separate from the performance, but is itself a kind of performance. A sustained act of becoming that runs for months or years before a single frame is captured. It is rare. It is unsustainable in its pure form. And it is, when it works, unlike almost anything else the cinema can produce. The ghost in the machine is a terrifying metaphor when you take it fully seriously. A ghost is not alive. It exists in the space between presence and absence, between what was and what is no longer. It communicates through the body of the vessel it inhabits, through the voice, through the way the hands move, through the eyes that are simultaneously someone else's and entirely its own. Austin Butler does not play Elvis Presley. He did not play Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen. He does not play Benny Cross. He allows them, one by one, to play him. And what we see on screen, that quality of visceral, unguarded, somatic truth, is not the performance. It is the haunting.